before we begin, subscribe. Because some plantations didn't just punish slaves. They erased them. Georgia, 1852. The Ashwood Plantation stood alone between miles of pine forest and marshland. No nearby town. No passing travelers. Just cotton fields stretching endlessly under a pale southern sky. From a distance, it looked orderly, disciplined, controlled. But inside Ashwood, something was happening that no one could explain. Slaves were disappearing, not escaping, not sold, not dead, just gone. The first to vanish was a young field hand named Isaiah. He was 17, quiet, strong, no history of rebellion. He worked the West Fields under Overseer Grant, a man known more for routine than cruelty. One morning, Isaiah lined up with the others before sunrise. By noon, he was gone. At first, they assumed escape. Dogs were released. Tracks were searched. The forest was combed. Nothing. No broken branches. No footprints beyond the field's edge. No sign of struggle. It was as if Isaiah had stepped out of reality. The master, Edward Whitmore, dismissed it quickly. Runaway, he declared. But runaways leave evidence. And fear. The other slaves were not afraid of being caught helping him. They were afraid of something else. Because Isaiah had whispered something the night before. Something strange. He had told two men in the quarters. They're taking people. At the time, it sounded like paranoia. Now it felt like warning. 2 weeks passed. Life resumed. Then another vanished. A woman named Ruth. She worked in a laundry house. She had a child in the quarters. She had no reason to run. One afternoon, she carried linens from the drying line. She never reached the house. The linens were found folded neatly on a bench. No signs of struggle. No blood. No sound had been heard. Dogs were released again. They refused to track, whining near the tree line, refusing to move forward. That unsettled the overseers more than anything, because dogs don't fear runaways. They fear predators. The master ordered silence. No rumors. No discussion. But silence spread suspicion faster than truth. Within a month, 3 more slaves disappeared. Each time, different location, different time of day. No witnesses. No struggle. No evidence. And something else began to emerge. They were not random. Every person who vanished had worked near the old southern boundary, a part of the plantation rarely used now. An overgrown section near abandoned slave cabins from decades earlier. Those cabins had been shut down after a fire long ago. Officially, they were unsafe. Unofficially, no one liked going near them. The air felt heavier there, quieter. Even birds avoided the trees. One elderly slave named Thomas finally spoke about it. They used to take men down there, he whispered at night, for punishment. No one knew if that was true, but fear does not require proof. It requires pattern. Overseer Grant began rotating workers away from the southern boundary, but disappearances continued. Only now, something new happened. A guard vanished. Private Samuel Hodge, armed, trained. He had been stationed near the abandoned cabins. By sunset, he was missing. His rifle was found leaning against a tree, loaded, unfired. This changed everything, because now it wasn't only slaves. Now it was white men. Whitmore grew nervous. He brought in outside patrols. More guards. Lanterns lit at night. Double shifts. The plantation turned into a fortress. But the disappearances didn't stop. They simply slowed, and something else replaced them. Sounds. At night, workers reported hearing movement in the southern woods. Not animals. Footsteps. Multiple. Slow. Deliberate. Overseer Grant dismissed it as imagination until he heard it himself. One night, walking patrol near the boundary, lantern in hand, he heard leaves crunching behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Silence. Then a whisper. Not clear words. Just breath against the wind. Grant fired his rifle blindly into the trees. The forest swallowed the sound. No body was found. But the next morning, another slave was gone. And this time, something had been left behind. On the trunk of a pine tree near the abandoned cabins, a mark, carved, Fresh, a circle, with a single vertical line through it. No one recognized it, but it was deliberate, intentional. A message. The master demanded answers. None came. Fear began infecting even the white staff. Guards refused solo patrols. Overseers avoided the southern boundary. Workers hesitated near dusk. The plantation's productivity dropped. Cotton rotted in fields because men were afraid to harvest near the woods. And then something truly unsettling happened. A slave returned. Late one night, a man stumbled into the quarters, mud-covered, bleeding from his forehead. It was Caleb, gone for 6 days. Everyone froze. He collapsed before speaking. Water was brought. He shook violently. When asked what happened, he whispered 3 words. "They're still alive." The room fell silent. "Who?" someone asked. Caleb's eyes widened. "In the woods." Before he could say more, a gunshot rang out. Overseer Grant stood at the door, smoke rising from his rifle. Caleb lay motionless. Grant said it was mercy. He was mad, Grant insisted. But that night, no one slept. Because madness doesn't invent carved symbols. Madness doesn't make guards disappear. And madness doesn't explain why the forest now felt occupied. By the end of winter, Ashwood Plantation had lost 11 slaves and 1 guard. No bodies, no proof of escape, no signs of sale, just empty spaces in the quarters, and a growing certainty among those who remained. Someone was taking them, but not to kill them, to gather them, and whatever waited in those woods was organized. By the time spring arrived, Ashwood Plantation no longer felt like property. It felt like territory under siege. The fields were quieter now, too quiet. Where there had once been rows of workers bending beneath the sun, there were gaps, empty spaces in the line, tools left unused, cabins with blankets folded neatly but never touched again. 11 slaves, 1 guard, gone, and Caleb, the only one who returned, had been silenced before he could explain. Whitmore could no longer dismiss it as escape. Runaways did not leave rifles behind. Runaways did not carve symbols into trees. And they certainly did not return whispering that others were alive in the woods. So he made a decision. He would take the forest back. 10 armed men were assembled, 5 plantation guards, 5 hired trackers from a nearby county. Each carried rifles. Each carried lanterns. Each carried enough ammunition for a war. Whitmore addressed them personally. "Whatever is happening out there," he said, "ends tonight." They entered the southern boundary just after dusk. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Pine branches thick overhead, swamp air heavy and wet, lantern light flickering against tree trunks. From the edge of the fields, slaves watched silently, because deep down, they did not believe those men would return. The forest had changed. Even the air felt different beyond that line. Inside, the armed group moved cautiously. The abandoned cabins appeared after half a mile, charred with still black from the fire decades earlier. Collapsed roofs, broken doors hanging crooked. The lead tracker signaled silence. He had found something. Footprints. Many, not random, not scattered, organized, moving in patterns between the cabins. Fresh, within hours. That meant one thing. People were living here. Hidden, watching. One guard laughed nervously. "Runaways," he muttered. But runaways did not move like soldiers. They advanced deeper, past the cabins, toward a denser patch of forest near the swamp's edge. Then, a sound, a whistle, sharp, short, from somewhere ahead. The men froze. Another whistle answered. From behind them, they were not alone. Rifles raised, lanterns lifted. The forest remained still, too still. Then one of the hired trackers screamed. An arrow had pierced his shoulder, not from far, from close range. Chaos erupted, shots fired blindly into trees. Lanterns fell, shadows moved between trunks, not 1 or 2, many, shapes, silent, fast. The guards tried forming a circle, but confusion broke formation. Another arrow struck, then another. 1 man fell, then 2. They could not see their attackers clearly. Only glimpses, Dark figures. Coordinated. Strategic. Not wild. Not desperate. Trained. Within minutes. Half the armed group was down. Some wounded. Some dead. The remaining men ran. But the forest had already mapped them. Traps snapped beneath their feet. Ropes tightened around ankles. Men were pulled from the ground into trees. Disarmed midair. Screams echoed through the swamp. And then, silence. By dawn, only one man returned to Ashwood Plantation, a guard named Ellis. He stumbled into the yard alone, covered in mud, without his rifle, without his hat, his eyes hollow. Whitmore rushed forward. What happened? Ellis struggled to speak. They organized, he whispered. Who? Ellis swallowed. The slaves. A murmur spread through the yard. That's impossible, Whitmore snapped. But Ellis shook his head. They're alive, the ones who disappeared. They're building something. What? Whitmore demanded. Ellis looked toward the southern boundary. An army! The word struck harder than any bullet, because an army meant leadership, planning, purpose, and that meant someone was leading them. Whitmore ordered Ellis confined, claimed he was delirious. But fear had already taken root. That night, lanterns burned across the plantation. No one slept, and deep within the southern forest, fires burned too, hidden between thick trees. Dozens of figures moved in coordinated silence. Men, women, even Ruth, alive, working, building structures between trees, digging trenches, setting watch posts. The abandoned cabins had not been ruins. They had been cover. And at the center of it all stood a man the plantation believed lost. Isaiah, the first to disappear. He had not escaped. He had recruited. Each disappearance had been planned, timed, silent. The carved symbol on the trees, a signal, marking safe paths, territory lines, meeting points. Caleb had returned because he panicked. He wasn't meant to. The gunshot that killed him? Not mercy. Control. Because Overseer Grant had begun suspecting the truth. He had noticed tools missing weeks before. Food portions slightly lighter. Subtle signs. And now, the truth was unavoidable. Ashwood Plantation was not losing slaves. It was losing control. The southern forest was no longer wilderness. It was occupied land, and the people disappearing one by one were not victims. They were volunteers. Whitmore gathered the remaining guards the next morning. We burn it, he said. Every tree, every cabin. But as he spoke, a distant horn echoed from the woods. Low, deep, intentional. A signal, then another from a different direction. And another. The sound surrounded the plantation. Not close enough to attack. Close enough to warn. Ashwood was being watched, measured, encircled. And for the first time, Whitmore realized something terrifying. The plantation was no longer the center. It was a target. The horns did not stop. They echoed through the trees at sunrise. Low, measured, deliberate. Ashwood Plantation woke to a sound it could not control. Whitmore stood on the front porch, staring at the southern boundary. The forest no longer looked empty. It looked patient, waiting. He ordered every remaining guard armed. Positions were set around the main house. Cotton fields were abandoned. No one worked, because no one believed work mattered anymore. They believed survival did. By mid-morning, the first sign appeared. A figure stepped out from the tree line, unarmed, hands visible. It was Isaiah, the first to disappear, alive, stronger than before. Behind him, shapes moved between trees, dozens of them, not charging, not shouting, standing, watching. Isaiah took 3 slow steps forward and stopped. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood. Whitmore's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, Whitmore called out. Isaiah's voice carried clearly across the field. No, he replied calmly. You did. The guard shifted uneasily, because this was no mob. No chaotic uprising. This was controlled, strategic. Whitmore raised his rifle slightly. You think you can win? Isaiah did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand, and from the forest, more figures stepped forward. Men once thought gone, Ruth, 2 field hands. Even Private Hodge, the guard who had vanished, alive, but unarmed, standing beside them. Whitmore felt the ground shift beneath him. "What is this?" he demanded. Isaiah spoke again. "You said we were property." He pointed to the forest. "Property does not organize." The guards around Whitmore hesitated, because they were outnumbered, not just in bodies, in certainty. For weeks, fear had eaten at the plantation. Now that fear had a face, and it was calm. Whitmore gave the order. "Fire." A shot rang out. It missed, before a second could follow. A trap snapped beneath one guard's feet. He dropped. A rope tightened around another's rifle, yanking it away. From the forest, arrows flew, not to kill, to disarm. Precise, controlled. Within seconds, half the plantation's defenses were neutralized. No wild charge followed. Instead, a slow advance. The forest line moved forward as one. Whitmore fired again, this time hitting a tree, not a person, because the advancing line did not break formation. They moved like soldiers, not slaves. And then Whitmore realized something fatal. They had been preparing for months. The disappearances were not random. They were recruitment, training, relocation. Ashwood Plantation had funded its own rebellion, with food, with shelter, with time. The southern cabins had been rebuilt, hidden platforms constructed in trees, supply caches buried, signal systems created. Isaiah had not run away. He had studied the land, mapped patrol patterns, watched guard rotations, and each person who vanished had been chosen carefully. Strong, loyal, quiet. Whitmore stumbled backward toward the main house. The remaining guards threw down their rifles. No one wanted to die for a collapsing system. Isaiah stopped 20 feet from the porch, close enough to speak without shouting. "This ends today," he said. Whitmore tried one last tactic. "You think the law will protect you?" Isaiah shook his head. "The law built this." He gestured around the plantation. "We're not asking it for permission." Behind him, more horns sounded, from different angles. Not attack signals, victory signals. Because Ashwood was surrounded, not by chaos, by intention. Whitmore's shoulders sank. For the first time in his life, he understood he was powerless. The plantation house was entered, not looted wildly. Cataloged, records gathered, ledger books taken, names preserved, because erasure had always been the plantation's weapon. Now it would not be allowed. The remaining guards were escorted off the property, alive, unharmed, told not to return. By sunset, Ashwood Plantation was no longer under Whitmore's control. It belonged to those who had worked it, and the forest did not burn. Instead, it expanded. Structures rose between trees. Fields were replanted under new authority. Paths widened. Watch posts remained, because Isaiah understood something critical. Freedom must be defended. Weeks later, a neighboring landowner sent riders to investigate rumors. They never reached the house. Stopped at the boundary by armed figures standing calmly beneath pine trees. No shots fired. No threats needed. The message was clear. Ashwood was no longer plantation land. It was occupied territory. Whitmore left the county quietly, his wealth gone, his name whispered with disbelief. How did slaves take a plantation? The answer was simple. They hadn't taken it overnight. They had taken it slowly, one by one. Months later, a traveler passing through Georgia reported something unusual. Near the old Ashwood property, smoke rose peacefully from chimneys. Children played near tree lines. Men trained in open clearings. Women managed supplies with organization that rivaled any plantation ledger. And carved into a pine tree at the southern boundary, a circle with a single vertical line through it. No longer a warning, now a symbol of survival. The plantation that once erased people had been erased itself. And the forest, it had never swallowed the missing. It had sheltered them. Because sometimes disappearances are not losses. Sometimes they are beginnings. And Ashwood Plantation learned too late. If you push people into the woods long enough, they stop running. They start building.